Welcome back, everybody, to session 7 of SEWAS Psychology online workshops. My name is Matt Yates, and I'm here with my colleague.
I'm Vicky James Perkins.
And today we're talking about reasons. This is kind of the third in our mini kind of series that we're focusing on the regulation, the relate, and the reasons, basically how to help your child. And today we managed to get ourselves to the top of this upside down pyramid. So once again, this is Beacon House graphic they produced. So Dr. Bruce Perry's idea of demonstrating how when we work with children, particularly children who are traumatized, we've got to work them neurosequentially. We've got to work them the way that their brain has been built from the bottom up. So starting at the brain stem to help them regulate, move up into the limbic brain for that relational connection. And then today, we've finally got to the top of this and we're thinking about reasons. So thinking about the cortical brain, the upstairs brain. It's this top bit here. So thinking more about this. So if you think about how a baby is pretty much born with their brain stem, the limbic brain pretty much ready to go. The cortical brain, particularly the upstairs brain, this actually continues to grow and develop way into our mid-20s. So actually it's a long, long process of this just growing and developing and learning and building, which is really important, I guess, because it's such an important part of day-to-day functioning. So it's involved in controlling your behavior, planning, problem solving, learning, reflecting, all those fantastic things that us as advanced humans can do, which lots of animals can't do. So it's really important, but it's just incredible how this isn't fully developed until our mid-20s. And we only have access to it when we're in our upstairs brains, when we're actually feeling regulated and calm and feeling okay. That's the only time where we really got proper access to it. And that means, of course, then when we're in our downstairs brain, when we are feeling anxious or angry or stressed or unsafe or overwhelmed, we're in our downstairs brain. And that means actually this upstairs brain, this cortical brain, this bit that does that really sensible bit of reason and logic and planning and understanding, it's actually really hard to access. And that's why it's so important for us to talk about now. So, Vicky, do you want to start us off then in terms of how we might actually begin to think about doing this with our child?
And so thinking about what you've said, Matt, in that it's important for our children to feel safe and to feel safe in their bodies, regulated, and then safe then with us, which is the relate part. So of course that is a really important start, but that's still not going to help them go on to learn or kind of develop their understanding or make sense of what went wrong, what they're finding tricky, what they keep getting stuck with, and kind of develop that reflection part of their brain. So all those things that Matt noted that we develop particularly through those early years as children, they need help developing those skills of regulation, of thought, of processing. So the key message here is we need to really connect with their inner world to help them do the reasoning with them and often for them. And I think that it's really important to hold in mind that that kind of what we know now about our reasoning brain is that for our children it's still under construction. For adults it's hard enough sometimes to figure something through when we keep making the same mistake or getting stuck with something. So it's really, really hard for our children. So I guess this is kind of a key headline for parents just to kind of hold in mind, is that they often won't know why they keep throwing the mobile phone, or why they keep shouting no when you ask them to put their coat on. To us as adults it might kind of seem obvious, or that they're just being difficult or controlling, which absolutely fits, but they won't really know what's making them feel unsafe or what's making them feel wobbly. So this is the part where we have to lend them our upstairs brain. What we know is that as babies grow, adults literally, it's been described as they download their prefrontal cortex, their upstairs brain, into a baby's upstairs brain. So this key thing to take away is that they often won't know, and I guess clinically what we hear is that is the case. Sometimes they might know, and that means they're further along in making sense of it. So we have to do the guessing for them, which will often feel really frightening for parents. So, for example, if you have two children and you have been doing playing Lego with one of them, and you move over to help your other child, I don't know, do a bit of work or do some drawing, that the sibling will often chuck the Lego or try and sabotage. Our guesses about that often are that for that child, they feel really frightened when their parents' attention is moved from them. They worry that they won't be loved, they'll be forgotten. So for a parent, so to ask a parent to start making some guesses for that child. So for example, I think you worry that I love your sister more when I help her with her drawing. That's a hugely frightening thing to say for a parent. And like you noted, Matt, in one of our previous presentations, that often parents will feel perhaps like they're sowing a seed, that so things were already hard enough, but now they're sowing this other worry for their kid to have, or they're opening a whole can of worms that kind of make this appear bigger. And I guess what we know, and at the bottom of our bullet points here, we've got a quote from a phrase by Dan Siegel, name it to tame it. What we know on a neurological level is that once we start naming accurately what our children might be feeling, that actually begins to soothe their neurology, that actually begins to help them get calm. And if we make guesses and it's not true, our kids will be quick enough to go, you're wrong, or it's water off a duck's back. So I guess we wanted to acknowledge, and we'll keep thinking about that, how frightening it can feel to start making guesses about why your child's struggling. And I guess we've started to think about it. Dan Hughes refers to it as curiosity, being curious. So what we're not, not rocket science. We're often really busy parents who are under pressure, particularly when our child's behaviour is very challenging. So all we can do is just start to make some guesses. It's not actually necessary for you to get perfectly right. Actually, we'll go on to talk about why that's not very helpful. So we start with like guessing. Hey, you just checked that something's up. What's going on here? It's not making sense to me. I wonder what's happened today. So even starting showing curiosity by naming just broadly that something's up. What this isn't, and this is a really tricky point, and often one where parents keep kind of getting tripped up with, is the first thing we all do as parents when our kids are playing up, which in a way that's very unreasonable, is we will say, why did you do that? And I guess there's two issues with that. Firstly, it presumes the child knows and is sort of concealing it from you. And often, like we've talked about, they won't know. So it's sort of like an empty, a pointless question because they won't know. Or if they do know, it's because of some really kind of tough feelings they're holding that they're feeling too frightened to kind of share. And also, I don't know if you can recall any time someone has said that to you, the tone which we say that, the impatience that we have, the anger, the frustration, it will be received as a threat, as an attack. So even though your intention is to try and figure out what on earth was that about, to a child, they will trip right back into their survival, their regulation part of their brain. So it'll just give them an alert to, you're not safe, you've done something wrong, this person's angry with you. So it's really important that we try, and we'll still say that in our parenting. Why are you doing that? I've told you, very obvious stuff. You have the biscuit after dinner. We know you know that. Why are you fighting this? So I guess you'll still do that. That's fine. That's normal. That's not curiosity. That's us going into our old parenting patterns. So curiosity is about lightly starting to make guesses about what's gone wrong, what's going on, because we need to help our child build that upstairs brain, their neurology, for them before they can kind of hold it or code it in their own brains.
I really like there, Vicky, how you use the word lightly, because I think that probably really captures it, doesn't it? It's kind of like that, how holding light curiosity. So if you just generally keep in your mind that sort of tone of voice, that sort of way of being, that can be really helpful, can't it? Just generally trying to convey, I am really curious. Let's help me work this out. And of course, people will perhaps heard of and seen sort of curiosity when we think about PACE. So that's sort of Dan Hughes' idea of playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And I guess the reason why we've got it here is not to say that you wouldn't actually ever be able to do any sort of curiosity when maybe you're just connecting, relating with your child. It's just that it's going to be much more easy to be received, understood when you're in this reason, this part, it's really working the upstairs brain. And sometimes this sort of stuff can feel really overwhelming, but really just kind of hope that some of these just key points here just give you some snippets and ideas to things, general concepts to hold in mind. We're both massive fans of name it to tame it. It's a catchy slogan. But yeah, literally just saying like, wow, gosh, I wonder if you're just feeling really angry right now. Yeah, is a wonderful place just to start, just to help actually giving your child that vocabulary. So they're horrible internal states they don't understand, and you've given it a name. It can be a wonderful place to start.
That's a key thing through all of this is connecting with your child's inner world in a way that they haven't had enough on in those earlier starts. So no matter how difficult or tricky those feelings are, they're not alone in it. So that's kind of at the heart of this. And if you're interested, the Name It to Tame It, Dan Segal clip is on YouTube. You just search it, and he does a nice little 5 minutes explaining that if you wanted some more information.
Okay, should we move us on?
Yeah. Yes, so these are some key things that are important in thinking about this, because of course when your child is kicking off just before dinner and you say, hey, I think that it's been really tricky today in school, I think it's all bubbling up, they're not going to turn around and go, do you know what, you're spot on, Mum, thanks for that. Of course I know you know that, but sometimes I think that particularly when you're trying something very new as a parent, or if it feels quite clunky, it does for all of us, but you're trying to find your own style with it. It can feel really off-putting when you're immediately kind of criticized or challenged. So I guess the first thing we're thinking about for parents we find helpful is timing. So I know that you've spoken, Matt, about a piece of research that shows when a child is really dysregulated, so has really got entangled in that downstairs dysregulated brainstem area, it can take for the kind of the cortisol, the adrenaline, all those biochemical physiology to kind of calm again. It can take an hour for that to get calm in our body. I don't know if any of us, if you can remember a time where we got really angry. So for example, any of you, had a bit of road rage, been cut up on a roundabout. I've noticed when I've gotten to work, it's still a bit buzzy in my body. So actually rage takes, physiologically time to reduce. So we can't expect, or for though it's going to be harder or more rare, that if your child has had a big blowout explosion, they've allowed you to help them get calm and connect, whatever way that is for them. It's tempting sometimes to just go straight to reason within those 10 minutes, and often that's just too much too soon. So I guess it depends on how big the explosion is, how comfortable your child is with connection with you, how practiced they are, where they're at in their upstairs brain building blocks. So I guess what we're saying is this takes time. Sometimes your child might need, a walk, a dinner, the comfort might be watching a show together before beginning to revisit the reason part. So we'll get to how we do the reason part if your child's particularly avoidant of it. But I guess it's really important, that doesn't work like it works on the YouTube clips or on the films where a child distressed gets a cuddle and then talks about it. It often doesn't work as neatly as that. It can at times, depending on how practiced your child is and you, but often not. So it's just kind of like being realistic about that.
I mean, it could even be, a day later or something, because it could take that time to feel that, do you know what, okay, we've got a moment here where my child is definitely more regulated, we're connected. Yeah, perhaps this might work now.
That's a good point. Yeah, and often some, couple of days, and parents will worry that they've lost that chance to help that child learn. And what we say is, your kid will keep coming back with those behaviours. You'll have plenty of chance to keep revisiting this. It's not going anywhere. So, and I guess if we think about arguments we might have had with partners or friends, sometimes we do need a little a day out, a few days to cool off to really kind of be ready to think about that differently. So that's kind of normal for us all, but particularly for children who are really feeling that unsafe, feeling so unsafe.
And getting into orbit. So we kind of talked a bit about this in our last video, didn't we?
Yeah, so this is, Matt and I found this helpful way to kind of think about the proximity at which you start doing curiosity. So if a child, like, there's nothing worse, is there, Matt, particularly when you've messed up or when you've exploded, if someone just sits and give you eye contact and start talking about, that was a really hard day, we need to have a think about why that happened. It's just way too intense. It's way too confrontational, no matter how sensitively you do it. So often we think about, how do we take a bit of a step back so that we can start doing this in a way that doesn't feel too intense or overwhelming. So even when I notice, when I do it clinically, just looking away to kind of doing that wondering out loud thing, like, gosh, that's really hard, that keeps happening, I wonder what gets so tricky after school. Just averting your eyes, and just because it's saying, you don't need to answer me, I'm just trying to wonder this out for myself, it's okay. But I guess further on, what we often hear from parents when they try this at first is children will visibly reject them, swear at them, push them away. Don't talk to me like that. Don't be messing into, making guesses on me. So we talk about, I guess I'm thinking of it as a physical proximity, so being further away. And I know we talked about this in our previous videos, but making guesses to pets, or if your child's younger, to a teddy bear, like, hey, she got really angry then when I said no to another biscuit, or when I said we can't go out this afternoon. I wonder why that was so hard. I think when I say no, I don't know, maybe she thinks I don't love her, or she's not a good kid. I don't know. So anyway, you're starting to make those guesses, but to the teddy bear, because again, that's less pressure. Or I've mentioned it in a previous video. One of my mums, her daughter really can't manage the curiosity, so she talks to the past, makes guesses to the pasta, and they can't tolerate that. Some children can't even tolerate that. So parents have to literally take off a pretend phone call, it can be real, into the other room and talk to that person of, yeah, it was really tricky today. We only were allowed out for one walk, and he's got a lot of energy in his body, so it's really hard. I wonder if that's what was going on a little bit for him then, or he couldn't speak to his friends or they had a row on their messenger, or so I guess so we're thinking about, if a child is the center, is the planet, how can you bring your orbit, bring your curiosity just a bit close to him, so it doesn't hurt, so it doesn't overwhelm them, but they can kind of take it in a little bit.
And
And
then go on, Joe, keep going.
that we keep kind of revisiting this, but don't expect a response. So I know that obviously you won't necessarily, but it still hits even when we do it, when we use this in our therapeutic approaches, or in our own parenting. But it's still hard when you're working really hard to kind of name this stuff and get closer to our child. We won't get a response. It's really hard to get feedback that you're getting there, you're doing this. So don't expect our kids to, in fact, expect sometimes a pushing away because they don't want us close to their world, because their world is not so great. One of my mums found feedback when she said, do you know what, she was talking the other day and she used my same words, the same language I used, and she said it hit me. She was taking it in. It was going in. For that that was enough feedback, albeit very tiny, that was working. So don't expect a response when you do the curiosity stuff necessarily. Some kids do, but not necessarily.
Yeah, and like you're saying, just because you don't necessarily get a response doesn't mean it's not going in. Doesn't mean it's not actually helping you download your upstairs brain into their upstairs brain. Yeah, excellent.
Okay.
So I guess we've got some just general things just to remind yourself. It's kind of, I guess, a bit of a refresh of some of our previous videos.
Yeah, so this is the most hardest part throughout, is regulate yourself first. What we know is we cannot lend our upstairs brain to our kids when we are in our downstairs brain, not accessing it. So particularly for those very challenging behaviors, this, is absolutely relevant, is often you will be in your downstairs brain. So in those moments, whilst you still might, jump frog up to reasoning, you will. I guess what we're saying is it's not particularly going to be helpful. So at the priority at that point, if you're able to catch yourself, is to get calm yourself and to kind of take, whatever you need to do that, whether it needs to be an hour, a day. I guess just checking that. We can't do reason when we're in our own downstairs brain. And then, yeah, the next point, acceptance and empathy. It's tempting when we start to make these guesses and they might start to connect, like our kid might be listening and not shout back at us when we make guesses like, I wonder if you're scared that your friends will all forget about you. It's tempting then to kind of jump to reassure and go, it's okay, they'll remember, we'll keep texting them or whatever. Rather, what we urge parents at this point is to just hold that, as painful as it is, thinking about Matt's downwards arrow in our last video, and sprinkle in acceptance and empathy, so that I wonder if you think your friends will forget about you. Gosh, that must be so hard. No wonder you're worried about that, or no wonder you feel all wobbly. That's really hard. Just pushing yourself to hold that for a few more seconds before going back into, that makes sense then when you demand in your computer, it means the world to you. Yeah. And then, so often, even though, lovely thing about our model, it's a nice triangle, stages 1, 2, 3, nice and simple. Of course, it's not like that. Often it will be a to and fro in between the bottom two bits. So even though it feels great to finally get to a place where your child will be more open to reason, you will often keep tripping back down, and your child will, and that's okay too, I guess. Just to say that that's what we'd expect. That's what happens normally developmentally. So be kind to yourself. It's really hard. Reason is something that we're also practiced at and good at, and we will jump to, we trained as psychologists, reason's our thing. So to have to really pause ourselves and really attend to those earlier neurodevelopmental layers is asking us to rewrite our own neurology. Remember the motorway and then the grass fields, just acknowledging neurologically this is a real big hard task for us. Never mind, you guys parenting are going to be absolutely in that. And our last point, Matt, it's okay to get it wrong. Yeah, we get it wrong all the time. Developmentally, we always get it wrong with our babies. We would say, what's the matter? Have you got a burp? No. Is it your nappy? No. But I guess we're just okay with that, because it feels a little bit more natural. I guess it's just to hold in mind, you'll get it wrong a lot. You'll make wrong guesses. We make wrong guesses clinically. That's part of communicating. No matter what, I'm going to still keep trying because you're worth understanding. You're understandable. And just, it's so hard when you're putting yourself out there, particularly for parents where this kind of style of talking feels more clunky or less familiar. You're finding your own way to do it. When getting it wrong, you'll feel quite self-conscious and it will feel rubbish. So I guess just acknowledging, yes, so take it at your pace, what's comfortable for you, and trying this new stuff.
And I guess on that theme, that actually really nicely kind of leads us to our next slide. Or actually, do you know what? I might just. Oh, actually, no. We'll come back to it. But yeah. So I guess the reason we put this next slide up was just kind of it almost felt like a bit like a traffic light system. This idea. So what we're kind of saying is, if you feel your child has got to a point where they're just about enough in their upstairs brain that they might be able to do some reason, do some planning, some logic, some kind of learning from their behavior, absolutely green light, give it a go. If however you think maybe you're just on that kind of relation connection sort of stage, still kind of wobbling a bit of the regulation, it's kind of amber, because generally speaking it's going to be much harder to sort of get anywhere near that reason. You might get little pockets, so you might get a little bit of kind of a name to tame it, like sort of just plopping in there, kind of, I wonder if you're feeling this way. Absolutely. But if you're down in the bottom, if your child's down in their survival mode, if they're in their brainstem, absolutely, it's a red light, and all we can do at that point is just regulation. There'll be absolutely no point in getting anywhere near any of that reason stuff, because your child will be completely in their downstairs brain, and we need this upstairs brain to do that reason stuff.
I really like that idea of just sprinkled here and there, because when this was first developed as a therapeutic approach, it's quite a long, articulate conversation, which doesn't happen in real life for any of us. So this is how it actually happens, and developmentally, what's healthy and typical and normal is that sprinkling here and there of phrases. And it was making me think, Matt, when you were describing that often when our children are quick to trip back into being dysregulated, it's often helpful to bring the reasoning in whilst doing something regulating. So for example, Dad found the only way his little one would tolerate a bit him doing that a little bit was when they were walking. So they'd walk the dog, or when they were walking to Asda's, and literally it would just be that hey, I've noticed Fridays are tricky when you come home. It's really tricky. I wonder what happens in school on Friday. I don't know, but I just think something about Fridays.
Mm.
And then the child would then go, look at that bird, Dad, or whatever. And that's fine. That means that was just enough. And we talked about, Bruce Perry talks about dosing, about doing just a little sprinkle, enough to kind of push a bit more in a way that that child hasn't had, but not too much so that they go right back into dysregulation. So the walking activity was a helpful keep my body regulated whilst I'm hearing this stuff, whilst you're talking about that dreadful outburst I have on Fridays that I don't want to think about right now.
Mm. What a wonderful story, because in a way that basically captures this entire slide, because the walking is very much a brainstem calmer. It's just a repetitive left, right, nice little pace. It's the two of them. It's the sounds like a father and child you're describing. So just like they sound connected. And then yeah, just able to plop in a little bit of the reason. And yeah, perhaps it's a bit much at that moment, but yeah, a really nice illustration of kind of bringing these concepts together.
Mm.
Okay. So, Vicky, okay.
Yeah.
So,
The
when
big
we're talking about
finally.
reason, finally, yeah. So,
Yeah.
I guess it's just so important for us to talk about this because, of course, a big part of parenting is thinking about consequences. And the reason why we're bringing into this session is because the time when your child will even be able to get anywhere near consequences will have to be when they're regulated, when you've got that connection, and then that accessible, that upstairs brain, that kind of reasoning part of the brain is online. So here we are, we're at consequences.
Yeah, and I guess just to kind of reiterate, consequences are really important, and you'll be doing them anyway. But I guess what we wanted to think with you today about is when your consequence, either your child just won't do them, or they're not really like changing anything. Your child will keep checking their phone, or they will keep refusing to have bath time, no matter what your consequences are. So I guess just to say we absolutely need consequences. And for us, like the key reason, there's lots of reasons why we use consequences, but the key one for us thinking in this way is to help our children learn. Our children need to have that upstairs brain built with learning about why a behavior is there, what's driven that, what's the result from that. So we absolutely need them. Generally in parenting, the kind of typical consequences are those kind of broad stuff like, I don't know, when your kids are young, rewards like a sweet or a sticker or taken away of them. As our kids get older, and easy kind of, general consequences are easy. They're straightforward. You just go to them. You're grounded. You can't go on the computer today. That kind of stuff. So those are kind of the broad stuff. And I guess you will know that often they don't work, or that you just having to do the same thing over and over. So this is about, we need to think about, how do we really think about consequences when we're getting really stuck in a behavior. So I guess the key thing is that traumatized children are unlikely to learn from these traditional consequences. And just a few reasons are that so if we give a child a timeout, or go to your room, or sit on that step, think about what you've done, that usually can work for children who've had safe starts, because the punishment is being away from us. When they want in, they like being near us, it feels good. So of course, for a traumatized child, being out isn't new for them. That's something that they've been familiar with, and they struggle to learn and to accept the warmth, or trust the warmth of another adult. So that's not going to be particularly motivating to get back in. It also just triggers that feeling of that they're bad, that the sticker rock stuff. It just kind of commit. And also, the classic is, and there was a big wave of this a few years ago, of that, the thinking spot, the reflect, sit there and think about what you've done. That's fine if a child is neurologically kind of developed for that age. But what we know is that our children, particularly when they're in their their brainstem fight flight mode, is that neurologically that is impossible for them at that moment. They won't be able to think about it, or if they do think about it, it'll be all about because they're bad. And also, often our children that have had those tricky starts, they won't yet have the same kind of building blocks in their thinking skills, so they're earlier on. So basically, it doesn't really provide an opportunity for learning. It just, in fact, feelings of shame, which is why then they don't work at these times. So if we always say, if they're working, great, keep using them wherever they are, that's safe. But it's when they're not working and you're wanting to think about a different way, we need to kind of rethink consequences differently.
And this is so hard because, you know, anybody growing up, you know, within the UK, within the Western world, what we are taught as what we should do for kids is consequences. We're told it by society, we're told it by, in terms of the entirety of the schooling system is based on consequences and punishments. And you may have so many, those watching at home may have so many friends, family, who are all very, very well meaning in terms of maybe, you know, giving a little tidbits of advice, saying, oh, you just need to be a bit stricter, you need to do this. Have you tried taking this away when they do this behavior? All comes from a really, really well-meaning place, and that we are just being kind of brought up and to understand is that's what you do with children. And the thing is all that stuff works to an extent for kids, as like Vicky says, that haven't had a tricky start. But for traumatized children, it is much, much, much less likely to be effective. And quite often, some of our go-to responses I just listed there, they're actually often like to make a child more dysregulated, so actually take them further into their downstairs brain and even less likely to sort of understand or learn from that consequence.
I guess just to acknowledge that, particularly when you're stressed as a parent, when behaviours are really high and your resources are low, you're more likely to trip back into these traditional consequences. And that's okay too, obviously. Thinking about this in a different way is challenging. It's much more complicated. So just to kind of say, you'll go there, just keep being kind on yourself.
Yeah.
So we can talk a long time about consequences, but we've tried to kind of break it down in a kind of a simple way to hold in mind. So again, acknowledging our kid can only start to do the consequences once they've gone through this triangle. So that's why we've taken so long to build up to this. So we think about it as consequences being twofold. It might be that you decide, you know what, I'm not going to give a consequence for that because that was bound to be a disaster and we just need to have a clean slate here and try again. But you're always thinking about what happened that went so wrong. What do I need to manage differently next time? So we think about it as a consequence for the parent, which is not the parent has time out, but although sometimes that parent might need that to regulate. This is about whatever the child was struggling with often is a cue that developmentally they're out of their depth. So we talk about it as a parent needing to provide increased structure and supervision. So what that means is, for example, if a child tantrums, or tantrum is for the younger is an understatement, if your child starts to really kick off when you need to put your shoes on to go out for your walk, what we talk about is that child is struggling with that transition out of the house for lots of reasons. So increasing structure and supervision at that point won't be, right, then I'm going to watch you put your shoes on. It's more about offering more, as you might offer more support for a younger child. So you might say, you might make a playful game of, I'm going to put this toe in here. Hang on, let me warm him up first. Or so you're giving more guidance in a light, hopefully in a way that feels safe. And you're doing it for them, even though your child's capable of doing their own shoes and coat. You're adding in the structure of helping putting their coat on them, because at that moment they're feeling really wobbly and they're needing a little bit more in. That's one example of how that might be a consequence for your child having kicked off for not getting their shoes and coats on. And that we think about consequences for the child. And often this comes down into two ideas, which is an opportunity to put something right. So if a child has hurt somebody or broken something, they need to make amends for that, to learn that that's not okay. So that will depend on your child's developmental ability and where they're at. So sometimes that might look like, you hurt me, so you need to put this cream on to make it better, or you need to help me do this chore because my hand hurts because you hurt my hand, or you need to draw a sorry picture to your sister, or you need to help your sister by putting the plate out for her tonight. So basically a little gesture. And I guess the first thing parents will be thinking of, well, that's all well and good, but they won't do it. And what we know is once a child's had that regulation and connection relate, they're much more, and we've made guesses about and given empathy and acceptance as to why that got hard, they're much more likely then to go along with a consequence. So there's a massive sequence that then enables this to work better. And then there's an opportunity to practice a skill. So this for me is massive, in that whatever they were struggling with, they needed more practice at it. So we had a lovely example from a set of parents, two mums who'd adopted a sibling pair, and they kept basically kicking off in gym class, and you know, it was really tricky to work that out. And what they kind of got to was that these two kids actually don't really know, they can't really cue. I hadn't realized this, there's a lot of cueing in gym class, I've learned. So cueing was really hard for them. So one of the consequences was, you know, for that period, these kids weren't able to manage gym class safely, so they had to practice cueing. But again, in that, like, not a punitive way, just that, right now this is hard, there's loads of cueing, we got to practice this a bit more. Let's start at home. I know, let's practice cueing to brush our teeth. Come on, you go first, I'll go next, let's wait. Oh, this is boring. Okay, now my turn. So one consequence for these children were, I'm stepping back now and doing a general example, might have been to say sorry to a child or to draw them a sorry picture, to practice lightly and playfully at home cueing, because cueing is the thing that they're finding hard. So any generic consequence of, I don't know, a star or a star being removed on a chart isn't going to help these kids learn to cue. Cueing's the problem. So cueing's the developmental skill they're needing supporting. And then for the parent, the increased structure and supervision was, these parents needed to be right alongside them learning this in a ways that they didn't have enough of when they were very young. So that's one kind of, I know it's a simple young child example of, typically consequences would have been, I don't know, you can't watch TV this afternoon, or, you know, all the stuff we go to as parents, or you've lost a star. And the consequences looked very different. They're much more sort of sophisticated. But this was the stuff that helped their children safely build enough skill to then start to manage gym class again. Or
And it would be very much like you're saying, it would absolutely need to be matching their developmental stage. So it might be that maybe if you have, you know, perhaps an older teen, it could be that maybe, you know, they've broken their sister's toy. It might be like, okay, so, you know, next time we're in town together, you know, you're going to contribute some of your pocket money to buying this new toy or something. So obviously it really does have to be thinking about the developmental stage that they're at. But I guess that's a really good example of how, it's opportunity to put something right. It's opportunity to kind of practice a skill of kind of, when we break someone's things, we make it right and we give them replacement, or we say sorry.
That's a great example. I'm just thinking about a teenager's example quickly, Matt. Sorry, a parent described how her, you know, she gave a money card to her daughter with a limit on for Primark, £20, and of course the daughter spent £100. So the consequently, traditionally we'd say, right, you're grounded, or you know, you can't have your phone for a couple of days or whatever. But the consequence that this parent drew on was, this child struggles with either managing her impulse to spend or just managing money. So she increased structure and supervision by getting a special Henry card, I don't know, I'm sorry, but a card that had a limit on it that she couldn't. So there was structure around that. The child couldn't, the adolescent couldn't spend more. And there was a naming about, that's hard for you, so we need to practice this. So, and then she would have to pay part of her pocket money to make up for the debt that she'd accrued in Primark. But that's another example of how that might look like as teenagers. And I guess already chatting, Matt, it's clear that this is tricky, because every behaviour will perhaps need a different kind of approach and response. It's not as easy as you're grounded or I'm confiscating your phone. So this is just a kind of hopefully a way that feels like you might be able to draw on for your child, given where they're at.
Okay, brilliant. So we've kind of really named this already, but just to really say, so I mean, I'm very understandably, there'll be many people watching this at home who are like, what are you doing, Vicky Mac? You're taking away the one thing that I've got. How on earth can I, you know? And just to really say that it's absolutely fine for you to be going back to your standard consequences. That is normal, that is expected, that's okay. You know, we're just kind of offering that, you know, in a moment where you think you're just enough resource, you've had a bit more sleep that day, to have a little go at doing something a little bit different. But it's absolutely fine for you to kind of go back to the sort of standard things you used to do. That's to be expected, and just to be kind to yourself.
And just choose one thing, one behaviour that's not too massive, kind of you know, lower to practice it out and figure it through a little bit more. So yeah, keep going easy on yourselves.
And then kind of just the reason we want to put this slide in was just sort of saying how it can feel awful when we have a rupture of our child, when it all goes wrong, when there's big shouting, when there's big arguments. And there might be a part of you understand, but just think, oh, it'd be so nice if, we could just always kind of get things right. We could always be in sync. We could always be connected. Um, but in actual fact, what's much more helpful to your child is for them to experience that rupture relationship, experience a period of time where maybe it's not feeling okay and people don't feel great, but then that you can come back together and you can repair that relationship. So that rupture and repair cycle was actually much more helpful than the idea of constantly always being this perfect, being synced together. Because what that basically communicates is that we will get through this together. That relationship can be repaired, and because so many of our children's early life experiences would have been that ruptures happen, horrible things happen, and it isn't fixed. You're just left in that horrible, horrible place, feeling really dysregulated, feeling really frightened, feeling really alone, and just giving that experience of we can fall out, things can go wrong, but we can actually fix things. We can come back together and it will be okay. That's a really wonderful gift that you can help the child experience.
I think that's an important point, Matt. Ruptures feel awful, particularly the more that we learn in our parenting of children who've experienced trauma, the more shame we feel when we shout, when we slam the door, when we swear. Just that sense of finding a way to, and it's a big ask, a big deal often for parents to come back and go, listen, I'm sorry I lost my temper, I'm sorry I shouted. We still got to deal with this thing, but just holding your part in that, because that's what we're asking of our children, to hold their part. So we need to be the ones to kind of hold it for them first. And that can be a helpful way sometimes I get really frustrated and I shout, and I'm going to keep trying not to, but I will sometimes, and I'm sorry. That kind of, that can help create that safety in a relationship, no matter how bad it gets.
Brings us to our final slide. So I guess just a bit of a summary, really. So absolutely important that children and parents and you watching at home cannot do reason. We cannot do sensible planning, thinking, learning from consequences, logic when we're in our downstairs brain. We've got to make sure we're regulated and we've got that relate bit, that connection to help us go into our upstairs brain. And yeah, as much as we'd love to fast track to get straight to that reason bit, to get to that very adult, very human response of going, let's think about this logically, we will not be able to get there quickly. It will only be possible once that regulation and that relation, that connection is in place, first of all.
And remembering there's like two things going on. Firstly, your children are learning to trust you to help them practice their upstairs brain stuff. And secondly, they got a lot of building blocks to make their upstairs kind of pick back up. So they're working this really hard for you both. So yeah, that idea that we can't fast track this. Never mind, despite how clever your child can be in many other ways. Yeah.
And that brings us to the end. So thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye.